This is part of the complete history of House Targaryen, from the doom of Valyria to their fall in Westeros. In this episode, we'll uncover who ruled Westeros before the Targaryens and what triggered Aegon Targaryen to start his conquest. On the eve of conquest, Westeros was not one kingdom, but 7 fractured realms constantly at war. Picture a continent where kings fought kings, where borders shifted with every battle. The term 7 kingdoms comes from this era, when most of Westeros had consolidated under 7 major monarchs, though countless lesser lords still held their own keeps and territories. But make no mistake, this was no peaceful confederation. There was no unity here. No common currency jingled in merchants' purses. No shared laws governed the land. No central authority could call for peace. Instead, there was endless war. George R.R. Martin tells us there was hardly a time when 2 or 3 of these kingdoms were not at war with one another. These weren't temporary conflicts either. Territories changed hands regularly. The Riverlands, for instance, had been conquered by the Ironborn, taken from the Storm Kings, who had themselves seized it from earlier River Kings centuries before. This was a continent where strength determined borders, and strength was always being tested. Let's meet the kings and queens who ruled this fractured land. In the vast, cold, and stony north, House Stark ruled from their ancient seat of Winterfell. King Torrhen Stark commanded a realm larger than all the other 6 kingdoms combined, a land of endless forests, harsh winters, and scattered settlements. The north was different. While the south had been conquered by the Andals thousands of years earlier, adopting their faith of the 7 and southern customs, the north remained true to the old ways. They kept the old gods, worshipped in godswood groves before heart trees with faces carved in their bark. Their justice was personal. Northern lords executed condemned men themselves, believing that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. King Torrhen was gathering his scattered bannermen, though the distances in the north made this a slow process. Houses like Stark, Umber, Karstark, and Mormont commanded fierce loyalty, but their lands were so vast that assembling a northern army took time. Still, when united, the north could field 30,000 men, a formidable force by any measure. This was Torrhen Stark's kingdom, proud, ancient, and independent. He would later earn the name the King Who Knelt, but at this moment he was still a sovereign ruler preparing for war. East of the north, beyond the treacherous mountains of the moon, lay the Vale of Arryn. From the Eyrie, a castle so high in the mountains it seemed to touch the clouds, House Arryn ruled over fertile valleys and mountain passes. The current king was just a boy, Ronnell Arryn, who would one day grow famous for wanting to ride a dragon. But true power rested with his mother, Queen Regent Shara Arryn, a clever politician who understood that the Vale's mountain walls were both its greatest protection and its greatest isolation. Interestingly, this pattern echoes far into the future. Centuries later, during the events of Game of Thrones, young Robin Arryn would rule under his mother Lysa's guidance. Likewise, during the Targaryen Civil War, known as the Dance of the Dragons, Lady Jane Arryn would prove that women could rule the Vale with strength and wisdom. The Eyrie seemed to have a tradition of powerful women guiding its destiny. Anyways, the Eyrie was considered impregnable. No army had ever taken it by storm. The single mountain road leading up was so narrow that a handful of defenders could hold off thousands. Shara felt secure behind these natural fortifications, confident that her mountain kingdom was beyond the reach of any conqueror. The Vale commanded loyalty through the ancient bonds between the Arryns and houses like Royce, Hunter, and Corbray. Their knights were skilled and their loyalty strong, but they were used to fighting mountain clansmen and raiders, not dragons. In the gold-rich Westerlands, King Loren Lannister I ruled from the magnificent Casterly Rock, a fortress carved from a mountain of solid stone that overlooked the Sunset Sea. The Lannisters had been kings of the Rock since the Andal invasion, their crown paid for by the deepest, richest mines in all of Westeros. Loren's kingdom was built on gold. The wealth of Casterly Rock funded armies, bought alliances, and maintained the finest knights in the realm. Lannisport, the great city beneath the rock, bustled with trade ships carrying Lannister gold across the narrow sea. Their wealth was so legendary that in the century before the Doom, they had purchased a Valyrian steel sword called Brightroar from the Valyrians themselves, paying such a weight of gold that it could have raised an entire army. The Westerlands were smaller than the North or the Reach, but what they lacked in size, they made up for in concentrated wealth and military efficiency. Houses like Crakehall, Lefford and Marbrand served their golden-haired king with the knowledge that Lannister prosperity meant their own prosperity. King Loren was proud of his ancient lineage and his kingdom's wealth, but he was also practical. He understood that gold, while powerful, meant nothing without strong alliances. This wisdom would soon drive him to make common cause with his greatest rival. South of the Westerlands stretched the Reach, the most fertile and populous kingdom in all of Westeros. From Highgarden, King Mern IX Gardener ruled over endless fields of grain, sprawling vineyards, and orchards heavy with fruit. House Gardener claimed a lineage stretching back 8,000 years to the legendary Garth Greenhand, making them one of the oldest ruling dynasties in the known world. Their kingdom was the breadbasket of Westeros, feeding not just their own people, but providing grain to kingdoms far beyond their borders. King Mern commanded not just vast lands, but vast populations. The Reach could field the largest armies in Westeros, not just because of their numbers, but because their fertile lands could support and feed massive hosts. Houses like Tyrell, Redwine, Hightower, and Tarley provided thousands of swords, spears, and mounted knights. Where Loren Lannister had gold and Torrhen Stark had loyalty, Mern Gardener had sheer, overwhelming numbers. His kingdom was a green land of plenty, and its king was confident that no force could stand against the might of the Reach. He was both right and terribly wrong. Perhaps no king in all of Westeros was more feared than Harren the Black of House Hoare. From his newly completed castle of Harrenhal, the largest fortress ever built, he ruled over both the Iron Islands and the Riverlands, commanding fleets of longships and armies of both Ironborn reavers and riverlords. This dual kingdom was unusual. The Ironborn were raiders and seafarers who worshipped the drowned god and took what they wanted by force. The riverlords were farmers and fishermen who followed the Seven and preferred trade to war. Yet Harren's grandfather, Harwin Hardhand, had conquered the Riverlands from the Storm Kings, and the Ironborn had held them for generations through blood and terror. Harrenhal itself was Harren's monument to his own power and arrogance. For 40 years, he had poured the wealth of two kingdoms into building a castle so massive that no army could siege it, no walls could contain it, and no force in Westeros could challenge it. Its towers were taller than Winterfell's, its great hall larger than any other in the realm, and its walls so thick they could house entire armies within. But Harrenhal was more than just a fortress. It was a symbol of Harren's legendary cruelty. Stories of his brutality had spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms. He ruled the Riverlands not through love or loyalty, but through fear. Houses like Tully, Blackwood, and Bracken bent the knee to him because they had no choice, but their loyalty was paper thin. As our source text tells us, no king in Westeros was more feared than Black Harren, whose cruelty had become legendary all through the Seven Kingdoms. In the Stormlands, from the great fortress of Storm's End, ruled the last of an ancient line, King Argilac Durrandon, called Argilac the Arrogant. But by the time of our story, Argilac was no longer the young warrior who had once turned back Dornish invasions and slain enemy kings in single combat. The Storm Kings had once ruled the eastern half of Westeros, from Cape Wrath to the Bay of Crabs, but their power had been dwindling for centuries. The Reach had nibbled at their domains from the west, Dorne harassed them from the south, and worst of all, Harren the Black had pushed them from the Trident and all the lands north of the Blackwater Rush. Now Argilac faced his greatest crisis. He was an aging warrior. His famous mane of black hair had gone gray, and his once great prowess at arms had faded, and his only heir was his maiden daughter Argella. He could see that once Harren finished perfecting his great castle, the Ironborn king would be free to seek fresh conquests, and the weakened Stormlands would be the obvious target. This fear drove Argilac to desperation. He needed allies, and he needed them quickly. His kingdom, which had once dominated eastern Westeros, was now squeezed between enemies and running out of time. In the far south, where the Red Mountains met endless deserts, ruled perhaps the most unique of all the Seven Monarchs, Princess Miriam Martell of Sunspear. Unlike every other kingdom, Dorne was ruled by a princess, not a king, and Princess Miriam was no ordinary ruler. At 80 years old, she was blind and balding, her enemies mockingly calling her the Yellow Toad of Dorne. But behind her aged appearance lay a mind as sharp as any Valyrian steel blade. She had ruled Dorne for decades, keeping her desert kingdom independent through cunning, patience, and an intimate understanding of her land's greatest advantages. Dorne was different from the rest of Westeros in almost every way. Where other kingdoms fought with heavy cavalry and massed infantry, the Dornish preferred light cavalry and swift spears. Where others built massive castles, the Dornish relied on the desert itself as their fortress. Where others sought to meet enemies in open battle, the Dornish had perfected the art of disappearing into their mountains and sands, striking from ambush and melting away before retaliation could come. The Dornish motto, unbowed, unbent, unbroken, wasn't just words carved on a banner. It was a way of life, a promise that no matter who came to conquer them, they would never truly surrender. Princess Myrria embodied this defiance, and though she was old and her sight was gone, she could see more clearly than most that dangerous times were coming to Westeros. With these 7 proud kingdoms ruling their separate domains, what finally lit the fuse that would ignite Aegon's conquest? The answer lies in the desperate politics of a frightened king. Argilac the Arrogant, watching Harren the Black put the finishing touches on Harrenhal, knew his time was running out. After 4 decades of labor, Harren's colossal monument to his own power finally stood complete. The Ironborn king, who had already carved chunks out of the Stormlands, would soon be free to seek fresh conquests, and the weakened Storm Kingdom was the obvious next target. He needed powerful allies, and there was only one force in the known world that even Harren the Black might fear: the dragons of Dragonstone. So Argilac made an offer to Lord Aegon Targaryen. He proposed a marriage alliance. His daughter Argella would marry Aegon, and as her dowry, she would bring all the lands east of the God's Eye, from the Trident to the Blackwater Rush. This would establish the Targaryens along the Blackwater as a buffer between Storm's End and Harrenhal. But Aegon Targaryen already had 2 wives, his sister queens, the Senya and Rhaenys. He had no need for a third. More importantly, the dower lands Argilac was offering had belonged to Harrenhal for more than a generation. They weren't Argilac's to give. Aegon made a counter-proposal. He would accept those lands if Argilac would also cede additional territories: Massey's Hook and the woods and plains from the Blackwater south to the Wendwater and the headwaters of the Mander. But the marriage would be between Argilac's daughter and Orys Baratheon, Aegon's childhood friend, champion, and rumored bastard half-brother. For Argilac the Arrogant, this was the ultimate insult. Give his precious daughter, heir to the ancient Storm Kings, to a bastard? The suggestion enraged him beyond all reason. In his fury, he had the hands of Aegon's envoy cut off and returned them to Dragonstone in a box, along with a message. "These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me." Aegon made no reply to this provocation. Instead, he summoned his friends, bannermen, and allies to Dragonstone. He took counsel with his sister wives and even visited the castle sept to pray to the 7, unusual for a man never before known for piety. On the 7th day, a cloud of ravens burst from the towers of Dragonstone, carrying Lord Aegon's words to every corner of Westeros. The message was simple, but terrifying. From this day forth, there would be but one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled, and destroyed. And so, as ravens carried words of war across 7 kingdoms, Aegon Targaryen prepared to land with his sisters and their dragons. But that is a story for our next episode. Like and subscribe for more Targaryen history, and hit that bell icon to be notified for the upcoming parts.